Hey everybody, this whole week of the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast is sponsored by Dwell Audio Bible app, which I cannot vouch for strongly enough. There's a link down in the show notes below that lets you get that for yourself for a big discount if you want to, or give it away for an equally big discount if you want to. Thanks to Dwell for sponsoring the program, and thanks to you for supporting the sponsor. Have you guys ever done the thing where somebody says something so witty and clever and powerful in an awkward moment that as soon as you get away from the group setting and it's just the two or three of you, you can't wait to rehash the whole thing and break it down with each juicy detail? Like, did you see the look on that girl's face? Did you see how that guy was when you said this? Yeah, the whole time I do this. I find it to be really, really fun to do the debriefing on the social situation. And that's kind of what we're doing right now in Matthew chapter 3, because John the Baptist goes with this verbal flurry at the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, when they show up to his desert baptism party. And there's just a ton to step into the next room after it all goes down and break down, not just because it's juicy and fun, but also because there's quite a bit of theological significance to what he says. And please make a note of this because it's going to be important later. It's also important because a lot of the language that John the Baptist employs, both positively and negatively, are themes and even exact phrases that we're going to see Jesus employ as we move through his ministry. And that's not just an accident, and that's not just Jesus copying something or riding on the coattails of something that had already been demographically tested and found to be effective. There's meaning to that as well that we'll pick up as we go along. So yesterday we talked about the whole brood of vipers part of this insult that would have really driven at the identity of the religious leaders, because to suggest that they were children of anything other than Abraham would have been a startling shot across the bow. And actually, no, shot across the bow isn't even the right word here. I mean, calling this a shot across the bow would be like calling the Lightspeed kamikaze Star Wars thing a shot across the bow. This is an assault. They would have felt it. And however tense you imagine this scene being from 2,000 years in the future, I promise it was more tense than that. And then he gets into this language that further confirms what he meant with the whole brood of vipers things. That's what we're looking at today. He said, "Don't say to yourselves that we have Abraham as our father. I tell you that out of these stones, God can raise up children for Abraham." Now, something I remember from seminary and something I've seen in a few books is that there is a clever Hebraism here. There's a turn of a phrase in the native tongue of John the Baptist that I am not smart enough to understand, but I've heard from people way smarter than me that by arranging the word stones next to the word for children in the original language, that John is using a poetic flourish to absolutely eliminate any doubt as to what he's talking about, that being a pretty robust condemnation of the religious leaders and a pushback on their understanding of the security they had with God simply by merit of their religious relationship, religious descendancy, or ethnic descendancy from Abraham. But, so since I'm not really equipped to break this thing down, I'm going to bring in a ringer. I've got a buddy named Tuvia Pollack. He lives in Jerusalem. He speaks Hebrew. He also understands old school Hebrew. We met in Jerusalem when I was there, and I go to him sometimes with questions about language things on the internet. He's awesome, knows what he's doing, went to school for this stuff. And so I caught him on the phone here just a little bit ago and asked him a bunch of questions about this. He's outside the walls, literally, of Jerusalem, so there's a little background noise, but I think you're going to glean a ton from what he had to say about this passage and also what he had to say about another passage that I had a question about regarding the original Hebrew. And what he had to say about that was hugely eye-opening for me, and I think you're going to find it beneficial as well.
Hello?
Hi, Tuvia. How are you, man?
Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. We're doing this thing where we're looking at Matthew chapter 3, and I'm of the impression that John the Baptist is turning a clever little play on words here as he's denouncing the Pharisees and Sadducees with a play on words between the word for stone and the word for children. He says, "Produce fruit in keeping with repentance, and don't think you can say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. I tell you that out of these stones, God can raise up children for Abraham." Can you just walk me through what that play on words would actually be?
Hebrew is a very gendered language. Every word is either masculine or feminine. So if you're talking in general about lots of people, then masculine is always the go-to. That's sort of just how the language has evolved.
Okay.
The word for sons can also mean children, and the Hebrew word for that is banim. Stones is avanim. So it's just like since B and V is basically the same letter, it's just that A in the beginning that's the only difference.
How would I
Avanim.
spell the anglicized version of those two words?
So avanim, stones, would be Avanim,
Avanim.
and avanim, right? And banim, Banim. Yeah.
What do you think the chances are that this was an intentional play on words, or intentional, maybe play on words isn't the right term, but he's using two words maybe that sound similar, or is it just a coincidence in your opinion?
I haven't actually thought of that, but I mean, when I read the Hebrew translation of the New Testament, they're using those words, so I don't know if that's intentional of the translator side, because I mean, in the Greek New Testament that we do have, those words are not similar. So I mean,
Sure.
It's something that a pun that Matt might have done in Hebrew or in Aramaic in the original that sort of got lost in the translation to Greek, if the original was Aramaic. I mean, there are some sources who say it was. I guess it's possible, but I'm not entirely convinced. It could be. It's definitely a possibility.
So the idea that what John in the original language here was doing was that he was delivering this crushing twist of a phrase that would substitute out sons and substitute in stones. It might be a little bit of a stretch from non-native Hebrew speakers who are sitting in a seminary in North America and kind of maybe drawing some connections that you think could be there but maybe aren't. Am I hearing you right?
Matthew 3, right?
Yeah.
I'll open it in my YouVersion Hebrew.
Okay.
And just read it in the Hebrew, if that's okay. I'll just see if it sounds like how close it sounds in the Hebrew. Now, the translation we have is, of course, to modern Hebrew, but it's
Sure.
In which verse?
This would be verses 9 and, well, just verse 9.
Verse 9. אל תחשבו בלבבכם לאמור אברהם הוא אבינו, כי אני אומר לכם שמן האבנים האלה יכול אלוהים להקים בנים לאברהם. Yeah, you totally have those words right after one another. מן האבנים האלה אלוהים יכול להקים בנים לאברהם. Yeah, very close to each other. They are very, I mean, when you look at them written, it's just like one letter's difference. I mean, they sound a bit different because it's V there and B there, but when you look at them written in Hebrew, it's just one letter difference and they're almost exactly the same.
So it wasn't immediately obvious to you, but it's the kind of thing that if it was there, maybe the original audience would have seen it, and maybe we're just
Probably.
having...
I think so. Especially, I mean, yeah, I know. Yes, you look at John the Baptist as this wild guy out in the desert and everything, but I mean, he knew his Old Testament. He knew that he's Hebrew. I mean, we have these Qumran sects in the same area, the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that. I mean, they knew their stuff when it comes to Hebrew, so definitely. I definitely think that there could be something here. It wasn't immediately obvious to me, but when I look at it now in the Hebrew, you know what? I'm just going to real quick look up. There's an older translation, the Delitzsch translation, that was made in the 1870s into biblical Hebrew, or more Talmudic Hebrew, actually. Avinu min ha'avanim ha'ele yachol Elohim lakim banim la'Abraham. Yeah, it's the same. Exactly the same. I don't think it's by chance. I mean, I think the translators noticed this. This is Franz Delitzsch. He was a giant Hebrew scholar in Germany in the 1870s, and he translated the entire Bible to not biblical Hebrew, but to the Hebrew that might have been spoken at the time of Jesus, actually. So sort of using all kinds of words and phrases from the Talmud to get to some sort of Second Temple time of the Hebrew.
And so if he translated it that way, since translation is interpretation, he probably thought there was something to it.
I think so, yeah. I think so.
That's fascinating. Hey, while I've got you on the line, can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
You had some thoughts on the prophecy passage at the end of Matthew chapter 2 about, again, another potential Hebrew pun, the theory that when Matthew says, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, he will be called a Nazarene. You had some thoughts on the validity of that theory about the word for shoot.
Yeah, exactly, because I don't really think that is a pun. I think it's more it's not even a play on words, because it's not just that the words sound alike, it's actually the same word, because the Hebrew netzer or netzar or netzarim, it sort of means a branch or an offshoot, but it also means to keep or to guard. And I think that sort of comes of, you have a cut-off tree and you have some branches coming out.
Sure.
Then that is sort of, that is sort of the life was preserved, it was guarded. So you have the same word there. It's used in modern Hebrew in some ways also, like the safety for a gun is called a nitzra. They're using the same root. So netzer, anything that has to do with netzer or netzarim sort of means guardian or offshoot or branch or any kind of things like that. Now, Nazareth was probably called Nazareth because it's on a high hill. I mean, you've been there, right?
I have.
You can see a far away from there. So it's probably some sort of guarding tower there. And it was called Nazareth because this is where you're guarding. So I think that Matthew looked at this and he said there's a number of places in the Bible where the Messiah is called the Netzel, and he's born in a city that is called the guardian city, the Netzel. So could this be a coincidence? Probably not. He was He was growing up and coming from the city that is named of the exact same word that is used to describe the Messiah. Thinking that he's just looking at this and he's saying, "Oh, this cannot be a coincidence. This has to be some sort of divine reason for this to happen."
As a native Hebrew speaker and somebody who studies Hebrew professionally, what percentage sure are you in your mind that is what Matthew meant here?
Oh, can you remind me what the other theory was? You mentioned two theories that you said you weren't really convinced about. One that it was a pun, and the other one
that it's just a culmination of a whole bunch of prophecies that all talk about the humility and modesty and low state of the Messiah.
Humility and modesty. Yeah, no, I don't buy that. I definitely think that it's no. So I would say at least 90% sure, because it's not even a pun. Pun is, two words that just half sound alike or similar. But this is not a pun like that. This is like the same word. It's the exact same word that is being used. The same word that is used to describe the Messiah is also used to describe the city in which he's growing up. This is a fulfillment of a prophecy. Now, he maybe expressed that a bit clumsily so that it would be hard for non-Hebrew speakers to read it, but I don't think he originally thought that 2,000 years later, people from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean would be reading it.
Isn't that one of the tricky things about trying to make sense of Matthew and the New Testament and a 2,000-year-old document in general? Yeah, and I can handle my business a little bit, at least a little bit, on the history side and the philosophy side and that kind of stuff, but my Hebrew is garbage.
You're doing that great. Yeah.
Well, thank you. You're very generous. So, hey, could we do this again sometime? If I run into stuff that is just beyond, that has me out of my depth on the language, can I just call you up and ask you?
Oh, definitely. Sure. No problem. I'll be happy to.
Yeah, this has been a huge help. I need to go mentally process this a little bit. And we kind of got onto two things here, but I'm glad we covered them both while we had you on the line. Hey, I really do appreciate it, man.
No problem.
Wow, that was wildly instructive. Let me see if I can do my best quickly to summarize what I gleaned from that. Okay, one, although Tuvia wasn't familiar with this or convinced of it initially, when he looked closely at Matthew 3:9, he could detect that there was something going on here between the words stones and children. And if he's reading that right, and there's a lot better chance he's reading that right than I'm reading it right, that would mean that it looks like John is trying to say, look, this whole ethnic religious claim that you have to Abraham as your father is kind of dime a dozen, because God could just as easily whip up some rocks to accomplish the same thing. It's a jab, it's a twist, and it's an acknowledgement of, frankly, the power of God and the not really that important status of these people who imagine themselves to be irreplaceable and very, very important. Interpretation is mine, not necessarily Tuvia's. And the second thing is that Tuvia was very convinced of the linguistic explanation for the controversy surrounding the prophecy at the end of Matthew chapter 2. And we didn't get into it a whole bunch when I was talking with him, but you might remember this from earlier conversations. You got the whole birth and infancy narrative in Matthew chapters 1 and 2, and Matthew is citing all of this Old Testament stuff and constantly using language of like, then what was said through the prophet so-and-so was fulfilled, and then here's the verse, and it's, smoking gun, lock and key, prophecy from Old Testament, Jesus' fulfillment here, aha, you can see it. Except for the last one, where it talks about Jesus going to live in this town called Nazareth, and then he says, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, he will be called a Nazarene. That's verse 23 of chapter 2. And I told you before that we don't really know what to do with this, and that I've heard a handful of theories about what to do with this, and I kind of poo-pooed the one about, this being some kind of connection between the prophecy surrounding the family tree of David, this shoot coming off of a dead stump is the metaphorical, poetic language, the imagery that's used in the Old Testament. Some people are like, oh yeah, there's a connection there between that shoot word and Nazarene. I was like, I don't really see it. But guess what? Maybe I'm a giant idiot, and there is actually something to it. So that tells you how seriously to take me. Tuvia put that at like 90% certainty that is what the author was going for, and that is how the original audience would have understood it. Does that settle it? No, but it's pretty fascinating to get an insider expert take on that kind of language. Wow, we have gone on forever. I really am very committed to this whole 10-minute thing. So I don't know, I might make it up to you tomorrow. We'll see what we get into. I want to say thanks to Tuvia Pollack for lending his expertise to the conversation. If you want to know more about who he is and what he thinks and what he writes about, check out tuviapollack.wordpress.com or just check out the link below. Obviously, I also want to say thanks again to Dwell Audio Bible App for sponsoring this week of the podcast and for offering TMBH podcast listeners a really good deal on their product. And finally, I just want to say thanks again to you. I know some of this is really deep water stuff. I try to kind of mix up the depth and pace of this thing to keep it interesting and fresh and fun, but you're up for the conversation, and I hugely respect you for it. Thanks for being here. Can't wait to pick it up tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.